The year 2020 was a bit weird. It started off good, but then came Corona. Everyone had to be at home, and more people started watching anime.
We happy? Vincent! We happy?
This is referred to as the Great Shift, as before that, anime wasn't really mainstream, and I have to admit, personally, I was kind of an anime hater.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
1 year later, after having completed Attack on Titan and many other anime, I went to a bookstore and I discovered one manga that sprung out to me. And that was Chainsaw Man. If you've been watching my videos, you might be aware that I really like Chainsaw Man. So not only did I have to wait 4 years for this movie, but also 4 years to make this figure. And trust me, she is not the only Chainsaw Man figure that I've been waiting to make. Itching to make. And without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Since, as you guys know, Reze is basically the bomb devil, I thought it would be very appropriate to make the base a big-ass explosion. Explosions are basically made out of big cloudy fireballs, which I of course had to replicate with clay. Since I don't want to waste clay, I rolled aluminum foil into a ball and stacked them on top of each other to resemble an explosion. Since I don't want to waste a lot of clay, I rolled out different sized aluminum foil balls, which I stacked on top of each other to make it appear like an explosion. And once the basic shape was done, I added clay. Now you guys might be thinking, wow, he really knows how to make an explosion, huh? Nope, I have no clue, this is the first time that I did this, so it was a very heavy freestyle. So yeah, what can I say? At the end it was just forming it until it looked like an explosion. So yeah, it's basically just a lot of clay balls blended together. Now, I don't really have a reference for that, but that was actually a good thing, since I didn't really have to look out for specific details. Explosions are very random, so I sculpted random as well, if that makes sense. There is no telling on how exactly an explosion has to look like, so in a way you have creative freedom for that. The explosion is now complete, so let's set it aside and start working on Reze. For that I blew up the aluminum wire and iron wire that I have to get the wire skeleton. Once the wire skeleton was united and I put it in the appropriate position that I wanted the figure to be in, I started adding basic clay shapes that would complement the anatomy of a woman in order to have it easier to sculpt the figure. Usually I would cover it with a lot more aluminum foil, but this particular woman is rather slender, so I just had to go straight with the clay. Anyways, once the clay was added, it was just a matter of blending it smooth until the anatomy is complete. I've said this before, but these smooth figures that don't really have any details on their arms and legs, or basically just regular human anatomy that isn't overly exaggerated like with most of the anime men, are in my opinion so much harder to sculpt than actual muscles. Or at least both are challenging, but these smooth shapes are harder to get right than muscles. I don't know if that makes sense. It doesn't really matter. That's basically the same reason why heads like Chainsaw Man and Kaiju number 8 look better than regular anime faces. Although I must say that I have gotten better at them. I also covered the lower legs with Cosclay because it sticks better to wire and thus makes it easier to sculpt. Once the basic shape was done, I also added details on the foot. Since I'm trying to make Reze appear like she's floating, the wire is running through the foot. This makes it a bit harder to sculpt the toes. I guess in a way you have to have sacrifices. Following that up, it was time to finish the torso. For that, I rolled out 2 clay balls and pressed them on the chest. Then I just blended them smooth, but since they were a tad bit too big, I had to make them smaller. Seriously, I don't really like the fact that figurine companies make them so fucking big, especially for figures with smaller breasts. Like, Why? Fucking Guna, bro. Anyways, moving on, it is now time to sculpt the head. For that, I covered an oval-shaped aluminum ball with clay. Now, the design for the bomb devil was based on the Fat Man, a nuclear bomb that was dropped over Nagasaki at the end of the Second World War, and I gotta say, Fujimoto is really a genius for doing that. I don't know about you guys, but overall, the designs of each and every devil that Chainsaw Man has is really impressive. I mean, to get the idea alone is ridiculous. Anyways, after I got the basic shape of the head right, I added the lines and pressed in the eyes. To make it easier to sculpt the jaw, I also added an L-shaped wire on the bottom of the head. I then added some more clay and sculpted the teeth. Using a tiny ball stylus, I also added the gums of the teeth. Then it was just a matter of adding the jaw itself and then baking the head. Now the head is not done yet. I rolled out a piece of clay, cut out a small chunk of it and glued it to the back of the head. This is the section where the tail of the bomb is. For that I cut out 6 different triangles out of 5 pieces of paper that were glued together with superglue. As always, superglue and paper kind of becomes like plastic. These triangles are some sort of wings or tail of the bomb. These triangles are kinda like wings on a plane. They make sure that the bomb falls straight down, so yeah. I added those to the back of the head. And with that, Reze's head is finished, so let's add it to the figure. As always, I then had to sculpt the neck. Pretty simple, just add some clay and blend it smooth. Only that this time the neck also had some details. But before I added them, I threw her in the oven. I didn't want to ruin the detail on the body. Anyways, to make the details on the neck, I simply had to add a few thin clay noodles and then blended them smooth. With that done, it was time to add the clothing. For that, I first added her underwear using a very thin clay strip that I cut to shape. Yeah! However, before I added her shirt, I had to sculpt the hands. For that, as always, I glued together some wires in the shape of the hand using green stuff. And since I had a bit of a leftover from the green stuff, I made the flower that Denji gave Reze as a nice little Easter egg, as well as the bomb fuses that I'm gonna use later for the arms. Once the green stuff dried, I, as always, covered the hands with Cosclay doll. The only difference is that this time I added lines to the fingers to mimic the texture of her arms. Then it was a matter of gluing the hands on, and I continued to make the shirt. Now what's interesting with the overall Bomb Girl aesthetic is that the clothes and the arm sleeves are basically made out of bomb fuses. Which, again, heads up to you Fujimoto, that is genius. That said, to mimic these bomb fuses, it was just a matter of covering the entire shirt with lines. And since these bomb fuses are kinda woven together, I also added a few clay noodles to give it a bit more of a 3-dimensional feel. Now I'm calling this a shirt, but it's basically more like an apron, so I'm adding the knot on the neck. I'm gonna do the bomb apron later. I then threw the entire thing in the oven again to not ruin any details, and continued to make the arms. For that I covered them with clay again, and added the green stuff bomb fuses, since some of them are sticking out. Similar with the shirt, I also added some more clay noodles to, again, give them a 3-dimensional feel. Once they were added, it was just a matter of covering the entire arms with lines, and yeah, that's basically Reze done. Well, at least the sculpting part of her is done. What is missing is her bomb apron. And to make that one, I had to cut out 80 pieces of toothpick by hand and then glue them together in pairs of 10s. That took longer than it should have. Anyways, I now have 8 pieces of 10 toothpicks glued together, and the thing that I had to do now was stack them on top of each other. For that, I first cut out a piece of wire and then glued them on. Since Reze is moving, I had to give it a bit of a shape, and yeah, it was kind of a gamble, since I didn't really know how it would turn out in the end. And, of course, it is not really easy to work with toothpicks like that, especially if you have to consider how it's gonna move. With the toothpicks glued onto the wire, it was now time to add the thing that is holding the bombs together. For that, I wrapped around a thin piece of clay around each 10 pack of toothpick bombs and then just threw them in the oven. I also made sure to glue some more wire to be able to connect this apron to Reze. Now, of course, we aren't done here. As you know, I like to add some details and Easter eggs to my Chainsaw Man figures, and the one that I thought about for this one were rockets, since in the fight against Denji and Beam, she uses them quite a bit. To make them, I cut a thin wooden dowel in 3 individual pieces, carved the tip a bit pointier, and then covered it with clay. Now the tip is smooth, but the rest has the same texture as Reze's arms, since they are made of the same material. In a way, they are part of her flesh. So naturally, I had to add a lot of lines, and I swear to God there was more than one person who said that this looks like a dick. I get it. That's the worst part. Anyways, I also glued some paper triangles on the sides, and that was the rocket basically done. The only thing missing was the flame that is coming out of the bottom of it. And for that, I put some clay on a toothpick and just kinda gave them a bit of texture. And that's it, nothing special. As you might know, rockets are flying, so I had to drill in a hole in the back of the rocket as well as the bottom to be able to put an acrylic rod in one and the flame in the other. And naturally, I also had to drill in 3 holes into the explosion, since I'm gonna put the rockets there. And yeah, that's the figure basically done. So let's move on to the painting. Now you might have noticed in my last videos that I've started to add a white base coat to every one of my figures. It's better to paint it that way since the colors stick out more. So what I did was buy myself this Army Painter white base coat spray. It is much easier and much faster to use and doesn't waste as much money as using Vallejo would be. So that's what I did. I covered the entire thing with that white spray paint. With the primer now dried, it was time to paint the entire figure. And since this is the first time that I sculpted an explosion, why not start with that? Now, since we're not painting popcorn but an explosion, the first color that I had to use was yellow. So I covered the entire thing with it. As you guys know, explosions are big cloudy fireballs, so that's what I had to paint. A thing that I noticed while looking for references is that the closer the explosion is to the point of origin, the brighter it gets, since that's the hottest part. So I had to paint the outer layer of the explosion orange while keeping the insides yellow. To achieve that, I basically just dry brushed more and more orange, since I didn't really have an idea on how to go with it, so it was basically a huge freestyle. Now of course explosions also cause a lot of smoke, so naturally I also had to add some dark grey. It's quite important that you add dark grey and not black, because if you were to add black, it would kinda look brown. And that's important because we don't want to paint a diarrhea ball. And after a while figuring out how to paint it while I painted it, I kinda figured it out. And yeah, I'm satisfied with it. Let's move on to Reze herself. The first thing I painted were the bomb pieces. For that I first painted the entire thing black. In a way, this is gonna serve as a sort of base coat for the bomb parts. Since I've kind of grown fond of cel shading, I will attempt this on this figure as well. But not entirely, since cel shading the bomb pieces, especially the bomb fuses, is gonna be really difficult. Or better said, it's gonna be a huge waste of time, so I'm not gonna do it. The head, however, will be painted in cel shading. For that I covered most of the head in a dark grey layer of paint, leaving out the deep black sections. That way the lines stay out more and I don't have to paint them after I added the grey. As for the shirt and arm sleeves, or better said bomb fuses, I just went ahead and dry brushed the entire thing using dark grey. That way the lines are still dark and the highlights are grey. Speaking of highlights, I also added a few light grey reflections of the head to give it a bit more of depth and overall a two-dimensional look. As for the teeth, I just simply painted them white. Now, I say this many times, but Vallejo paints is truly a blessing in that regard compared to regular acrylic paints. It's saving me so much time. Moving on, it was now time to paint the skin. Pretty simple, I just had to cover the entire skin area with, well, skin color. The only thing that I had to be careful with was not painting the black sections as well as the underwear, since I'm kinda too lazy to make some corrections. But the good thing is that even if I had to do some corrections, it would be much easier to paint a dark color over a light color than the other way around. That being said, it is now time to add the shadows. Now, I have to admit, I'm not fully going for the two-dimensional cell shading style, because if I were to, I would have to add the shadow of the dynamite apron. Now, the thing with that is that I am a bit too lazy to do that. This is the third time that I'm sculpting the woman and the first time that I'm cell shading one, so in a way I want to practice cell shading on a woman. And like I said, if I were to fully cell shade it, I would also have to add shadows to the arms, which with that amount of detail would be a huge waste of time. Now I know you can barely see it, but I also added some highlights using a lighter skin tone to give it a bit more of a contrast and not make it look as flat as it is. Now the last step for Reze is just to add the line art. For that I looked up Fujimoto's art style and took some references and freestyled the shit out of it. Yeah, I don't really know how good I got it. If you want to, you can share your opinions in the comments. Now, of course, the painting process isn't done yet. I of course had to also paint the belt. For that I covered the entire thing, first with a dark grey, and once that was done, I dry brushed some lighter grey. This is also part of the not going for a full 2D art style. I think for most of my Chainsaw Man projects I will go for a semi-two-dimensional art style, because for some of my ideas it's gonna be very helpful, trust me. So stay tuned! Enough said, I also had to paint the things that are holding the bombs together, which I painted a very dark grey. I did the same thing with the rockets that I did with the bomb fuses, or better said, arm and shirt, so there is not much to say here. Except that with the flames, I also did the same thing that I would have done with the explosion. Then it was just a matter of gluing the two pieces together, as well as an acrylic rod that I also used on the GG Dandadan figure, and plant them onto the explosion. A tiny thing that I forgot to mention was that I also made a cup of coffee and spilled coffee. I wanted to reference Denji and Reze drinking coffee, and the spilled coffee should represent the romance between them that is now caught up in the explosion, meaning, well, I don't think I have to explain it to you since you've probably seen the movie by now. And with that, it's just time to assemble the entire thing. I also glued on the flower onto the explosion. The flower is still intact because, well, Reze did have feelings. I then assembled the rockets onto the explosion using acrylic rods, and added 2 explosions to Reze's hand. And with that, the figure that I've been waiting 4 years to make is finally complete. I really did enjoy making this one. There are so many more Chainsaw Man figures that I still want to make, so if you don't want to miss them, I really hope that you would follow me on Instagram, TikTok, as well as YouTube, to not miss a single thing that I make. I post regular updates on Instagram about my figures and how it's going with the process, so if you want to see that, go ahead and follow me. I'll be honest with you, I have no idea what the next figure will be that I want to make. The Chainsaw Man movie is stuck in my head like a piece of gum on a shoe, so I kinda want to sculpt Denji and Beam. I don't know, this would maybe be a bit too big because of Beam. So what do you think? Should I make Denji again? Should I make Beam and Denji? Should I just make Beam? Or hey, maybe something from Gachiakuta or My Hero Academia, since those two are pretty good.
Bah.
So yeah, what do you want to see me make? Go ahead and write it down into the comment section, and there's not much else to say in this video. I hope you did enjoy it. Please like, add comments and whatever, you know the fucking drill. I don't want to repeat myself, the video is long enough as it is. So see you guys next video. Also please excuse me if my uploads are not going to be as regular as they were this year. I started university and it's taking up quite some time of my life, so please keep that in mind. I'm also just a human. However, I do hope that I made it worth your while to wait for my videos. Bye bye!